Welcome to the 8-Minute Rule podcast, where actual physical therapists share clinical pearls designed to create conversation around what's getting results in the clinic. No fluff, no Medicare stopwatch, only quality content. Welcome back to the 8-Minute Rule. I got Drew and Mark here with me again. What we're going to go through today is tight hamstrings. So, question for the guys. Eval walks in, and as you're working through their subjective history, they say, man, I've just got really tight hamstrings. So what's the first thing that goes through your head? Just start us off, Drew.
Probably not. Is the first thing. I don't believe my patients ever. I'm that therapist, but in all seriousness, usually what's going through my mind is there some sort of adverse neural tension, or is there a weak tone issue? Because the length in and of itself, especially for hamstrings, does not seem to be a huge, I'm not saying never, but does not seem to be a big problem most of the time when people feel tight in their hamstrings.
Fair. What do you think, Mark?
My initial thought is you and everybody else. So kind of the same kind of concept. Now there are some examples where hamstring length actually may be important. In my background, my hamstring length actually was important, and probably the reason that I dealt with some injuries is that I didn't give it enough attention. But for the vast majority of the population, they're not actually tight enough that it's going to be something that's concerning or something that we really need to focus on.
Yeah, I think unless you're a college kicker, then we're probably evaluating this a little bit differently, right? So yeah, I think for me, the first thing that runs through actually is kind of an opportunity, just from a standpoint, all right, this patient at least has some awareness to that something feels tight. And, usually my first follow-up question is, are you trying, what are you trying to do to loosen them up? And they're probably stretching them. Not everybody, but a lot of them actually are, and they're surprised that it's not improving by their measures. So my first thought process around that is, what's your lifestyle look like? And we already know most people are sedentary, and so 9 times out of 10, this patient's probably sitting a lot more than they're doing other stuff throughout the day. And so my mind goes straight to that, and that we actually do have an opportunity with this patient to be able to even potentially use what their mindset is for this to help them create a change that could be good for them overall as well. So pivoting now, as you're working through this patient, again, I know this is very vague, but are you going to focus on stretch versus load for this individual who thinks they have tight hamstrings? What do you think, Drew?
Some of it depends, right? So if you're doing some testing and they don't actually have tight hamstrings and they have more adverse neural tension versus, hey, there does seem to be some length issues, and then is that tone modulated? Is there weakness? I would say my preference is to probably start loading in most patients first. If there's adverse neural tension, it may look slightly different, but I'm still probably going to do some loading in some sense. But it also might be, what are some of their expectations as well, and what can they tolerate? How irritable are they in their symptoms? As someone who's pretty fearful of loading, bending, things like that, I may avoid it and start doing some other active. I'm usually doing some sort of active instead of a prolonged stretch for the hamstring, which will work on some neural tension things and also some mobility and control. But I'm not doing a lot of static stretching usually for hamstrings no matter what, but how I load them may look very different.
Good thoughts. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, I'm glad Drew mentioned the neurodynamic component to it, because anecdotally, I think that a lot of the hamstring tightness that people experience is actually a little bit more related to the nervous system than it is the hamstrings. But my inclination, if I'm going to go for trying to lengthen something, is actually going to be to load it. Let's say I do need to address their hamstring length. I'm going to have a much higher success of being able to lengthen it through an eccentric load than I would be with static stretching anyway. And so if I'm going to load it, I'm going to look at a eccentric RDL or something to that effect to try to really work the muscle through some lengthening.
Yeah, those are good points. Also the neural tension component there. I try to have education to the patient early on. Again, if they're focused on their hamstring length, for true lengthening of a muscle, I want to say the data says you need 3 hours of stretching in a day. And I don't expect anybody to do that. But maybe their capsular restriction if they really, really want to put that effort in there. And so, same as you guys, I want to I want to go about it more with a load. I do love RDLs or some version in this instance, but if they do have a neural tension component, I want to be really guarded with, are we just taking things off, and do we actually need to be looking at getting some motion from some other side and going to the opposite side of the joint? The really cool party trick, somebody tries to bend down and touch the toes, they can't. You stretch the hip flexors out real quick, and all of a sudden they can get a couple inches further, and they're really excited about it. So, it's fun to look and see, do we actually need to address from a different area of the body as well, too?
I'm going to guide something else here.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I'll say I don't necessarily have a lot of evidence for this other than anecdotally and clinically. There is some subgroup of patients where they have some of that tension, some of the tightness, and it's maybe not necessarily neurodynamic. And if you have them do like an active straight leg raise, like they feel that tension. And if you simply do something to engage the core, suddenly it helps increase it like fairly significantly. So looking at core motor control can be a big piece to that tight hamstring thing as well, that sometimes related to neurodynamics, but not always.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Even probably to the point that we might be able to assume there is actually a motor control issue with most of these patients. And it's really helpful. Mark, last thoughts on your favorite exercise for tight hamstrings?
Well, that's an awesome point that Drew made there. And I think those folks usually come in and they're already stretching a ton. And it's like, I just feel like I need to stretch all the time. And then you have them do like just some engagement stuff. And then it's like immediately better. And even then, they don't necessarily make the connection that like, I'm better because I did this engagement, and they still want to stretch more. And it's like, we did zero stretching and you improved your motion by a tremendous amount. You do not need to be stretching anymore. You need to be doing this instead. You have to like spell it out, or they like will still go and stretch and stretch and stretch.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's just counterintuitive to people that, it feels tight, so I need to be doing something that I can feel it with. So showing them that light bulb moment multiple times in the session is probably a big key here as well too. So Drew, any other thoughts? Anything for you in terms of favorite exercise for this patient population?
I like just in general for someone who has tight hamstrings, I think the RDLs do really well, and it hits a number of different presentations. Like almost all the people we talked about could probably benefit from that, especially if it feels tight and they're getting a good stretch and doing some sort of a loading. That's my favorite. I also like to add some landmine stuff to it, especially if they have maybe some stability issues. Sometimes that actually helps a fair amount. Single leg's my favorite, but sometimes the kickstand ones. But some sort of RDL is probably what I'm going to have 90+% of my patients get to at some point.
Awesome. Good stuff, fellas. Appreciate it. Until next time.